these different lenses in which we process other people, and that's impactful, right? For better or for worse, depending on what our lens is. So a lot of times we hear the word race in terms of who a person is. Race is really constructed. It's this construct of categorizations and hierarchies of people as if we're fundamentally different from one another. This is bogus science that isn't true. It's rooted in a lot of really horrific history and justifications of horrible acts onto other people. However, it's something that's still totally embedded within at least Western culture, American culture, of how we view other human beings. Like if you fill out a form, chances are it's going to ask you what your race is. And that's going to be determined based off of very superficial factors, right? So like I filled out these forms every single time I have to fill out a form, right? And as somebody who is part Mexican and part white, every time I see one of those forms, it asks Hispanic, non-white, white, and not non-Hispanic. So when I was younger, I literally looked at like what I look like to determine who I was, right? Like, so that's a really messed up memory that I had, and I still have now. As an adult, I have more like confidence in myself, so I just like cross them out and correct that stupid form that I have to fill out, you know. But this is like a common reality for like filling out forms and how we as Americans view other people based off of these very superficial factors, right? And if I'm an educator and I'm viewing my students based off of these superficial factors, there's no way I'm going to be able to integrate culture on any degree of depth, right? Like I'm so tired of hearing educators say, oh yeah, I can tell so-and-so is native, or, you know, and then they start talking about facial features and skin colors and stuff like that. And it just makes me want to like, because like, that's rooted in this construct of identity based off of these superficial factors that are no longer really relevant, but a projection of a stereotype, right? Like just because I don't look like I belong on the side of a salsa container doesn't mean that I'm not Hispanic. And same goes for our students. If they don't look like they belong in like an old historical textbook, doesn't mean that they're not native, you know, or not native enough. And this framework that we're still assessing our students on is negatively hurtful and impactful because it contradicts a lot of times the experience of the students and how they construct their own identity, which is based off of ethnicity, who you are, where you're from, who claim to your people, right? And that's different, that's ethnicity. And then you have the factor of culture, and culture is reflections of patterns, behaviors, values, spiritual components within a community and society that's reflective of both pop culture and what it means to be indigenous today, but also retaining those historical factors of your people, right? And this is what we always get wrong as educators, is when we go to integrate culture, we always integrate ethnicity, which is specific to heritage, which is good, but you can't just leave it there, because if you leave it there, then you're alienating experience, you know, of culture today, right? We're not capsulating it, we're not putting it back in time, we're not going to put it in a museum. Culture is alive, and that's why we have these different analogies of how we unpack culture, right? Like that tree analogy is great, and I keep going back to this because it's not an iceberg, it's not solidified, you know, capsulated and stagnant. It's living, it's true to its roots, but at the same time it's growing, right? And changing and evolving with the times. If it's not, it's dead. Same with language, all of those components. So look at this in terms of how we unpack our lens of viewing our students. Now, I always give this analogy, you know, my oldest kiddo is as native as he is anything else, from two different tribes in the state of North Dakota. He grew up on the res and also off the res. He has a very indigenous last name, but at the same time has lighter skin. Now, if you're assessing him, you know, based off his skin color and then viewing him as not being native, then you're impacting how he's constructed himself and who he really is as a human being in the communities that claim him, right? And that's going to be negatively impactful. And we know that this construct of identity and self is extremely important in terms of academic success, in terms of life success. We don't need more English, more math crammed down our kids' throats all the time, but an understanding of who they are and where they're from within these spaces to build that confidence, to make them leaders, and to feel like they can accomplish all these different things. But having a negative perspective of who you are based off of how you're being projected by other people really impacts your self-worth and what you think you're capable of achieving. Now, majority of kids, whether they're on the res or off the res, meet this normal arch of IQ within society. There's no variation of intelligence at all, right? But there's a difference within access to materials, which is huge for like what a student eventually becomes. Resources are important, and when we have limited resources or limited experiences or negative perceptions of outsiders onto our children, that's the variable that impacts our students of whether or not they're going to be pumping gas or being a doctor or a lawyer or a teacher or a superintendent or working in administration and something else. That is the defining factor, not their IQ, not where they are. You can have resources anywhere as long as the school is able to provide for them, right? But limited resources and negative perceptions are like the determining factor opposed to whether or not they were at grade level in English and math this 1 year. You know, that is the truly negative factor that impacts our students, what they become. And that is on us as teachers to make sure that we're not replicating these stereotypes and then projecting them onto students as though this is what it means to be Indigenous, which is going to further alienate them from like who they are, their community, their self-identity, when we're integrating things that are inaccurate or on a stereotypical level. So the lens in which we're assessing is important. It's going to help us assess the materials that we're integrating for culture, and it's also going to change those negative perceptions that we have that end up impacting our students' ability to like lead in all these different spaces. So without saying anything more, I mean, that unpacks a lot at once, but that's a good thing. Like, what is my cultural integration? Is it superficial? Am I assessing these students based off of what they look like opposed to who they are as a human being? That's important, right? Because if you can unpack that and get into a point where you're making an integration regarding ethnicity, but then also tying it to culture, cultural integration, which is a reflection of being Indigenous today, and you're building that gap between past and present. Within all these different academic spaces, our students can see themselves within those spaces. We're developing 21st century skills that's gonna make them leaders within those different subject areas and gonna drastically improve their outcome, right? Like, resources matter, our perceptions of our students matter, and having the right lens to do that assessment matters. So let's look at this a little bit before I keep talking, and we can really look at it in terms of what we're all unpacking with this. This goes over the component of race, the history of race. This is a great book that really unpacks this construct, and hopefully really, I mean, I've read it, it's eye-opening, right? It really changes the way in which you can relate and see other people. It's liberating, read it, you know? But anyways, this is a short video that kind of unpacks that. It shows like where this construct comes from, you know, its impact on societies and cultures and things like that. And then this is the difference between what is culture and then understanding Indigenous culture. Now, these pictures are things that we usually associate with culture, and that's what we're integrating. And that's good because a lot of these things were taken from Indigenous students within academic spaces historically in boarding schools, and it's something that we're really not trying to address to give back today, right? Like, we might have the Lakota language or the Indigenous language class, and then that's like, we're doing stuff, look at that over there, you know, but like, what are we doing for English and math? You know, boom, 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 boom. It's still the same story, right? Like, when you look at the history of Western education for Indigenous students, what were we pushing, right? Like, a reality in which did not align with theirs in regards to community, in regards to values. We're projecting English as the key to their academic success, mathematics, and then, you know, rote memorization, skill labor, you know? What's new about that? Isn't that what we're still doing? You know, like, I mean, we're still saying like, these are your things of your, these are the things that you need in order to be successful. That's the same narrative that we've been projecting since day one within education for Indigenous people. What has been the result of that? You know, like, look at what we're seeing today. Like, why are we still doing this? You know, and this is important in terms of like how we're constructing our classrooms, our spaces, if they're aligned with the values and beliefs of the people, if they're aligning with the values and beliefs of like nation rebuilding, of sovereignty? Are we teaching within these spaces what this nation actually needs, or are we still saying like, hey, you know, this is what you need for the real world, and then we're pointing off the reservation, you know? And then when they're out there in like what we call the real world, are we fully accepting them within these spaces, or are we still marginalizing? You know, that's a good question, you know, and I'm not trying to get like a hot mic heated with this, you know, but like, that's important to actually assess, because we're still doing basically what we've always done, just with a different approach. And that's problematic because we're still not getting the outcomes that we would like, right? And that's negatively impacting our students. And when you're an actual educator who cares about your students, that's working with Indigenous populations, and you see how they're being negatively impacted, you know, that is upsetting, right? So anyways, this goes over a lot. It goes over traditional cultural teachings, like the medicine wheel. That's a good video. It's not Lakota Dakota, but this is for all you educators from all over the place, and just to get us looking at different frameworks of teaching and learning, because chances are when you're in university, all you learned about was like Western theory of cognitive development and nothing from like an Eastern, let alone Indigenous perspective of learning. How we structure our institutions are based off of our values, right? Our educational system is very based off of capitalism and what we think we need for you to be productive citizens of society, which is also going to make us as a nation very productive. Now that's different depending on the nation in terms of values and development of people, you know, like whole self, your gift as a human being. Okay, so unpack all this information. It is good, and hopefully it becomes transformative in your future practice.